All right, welcome back to our Recruiter's Guide to Tech. So, we've already met the front-end developers, the hosts in the dining room, and we've gone into the kitchen with the back-end engineers. But what happens when you combine them? Well, today we're putting it all together.
You guessed it, we're sticking with our restaurants analogy, because honestly, it just works so well for understanding this role. So think of this as us meeting the person who runs the whole show.
So, let's meet our restaurant manager. This is the person who bridges that all-important gap between the dining room and the kitchen. They make sure everything just works.
Okay, so what is a full stack developer really?
Well, think of them as that manager who can just as easily greet guests out front as they can jump into the kitchen to help prep. They're fluent in both the front end and the back end. It's not just knowing about one or the other, it's about deeply understanding how they have to connect to create that perfect experience for the customer.
And to really get why that's so special, let's do a super quick recap of those two worlds they live in.
So, on one side, you've got the front end. That's the dining room, right? It's everything the guest sees and touches. Then you have the back end, the kitchen. That's all the magic happening behind the scenes. The cooking, the prep, the databases. A great full stack developer, they're completely at home in both of these places.
Okay, analogies are great, but let's see this in action with something we all do. Clicking that Add to Cart button. How does our restaurant manager, the full stack dev, make that happen?
So here's the journey. First, you, the guest, click the Add to the Cart button. That's a pure front-end action. Then, that click sends the order to the kitchen. That's the bridge between front-end and back-end. In the kitchen, the back-end gets to work, storing the order, processing the payment. And finally, the kitchen sends a confirmation back to your table. A full-stack developer is the one who designs and builds that entire journey, end to end.
But wait a second. What about the waiter? If you've been following along, you might be thinking, hey, where does the waiter fit in all this? And that's a great question, because the waiter is actually a really clever part of this analogy.
See, the waiter has two jobs. To the guest in the dining room, the waiter is that interactive person taking your order. That's basically JavaScript. But to the kitchen, the waiter isn't a person. They're more like a system, an invisible messenger that brings the orders back. That's the API. It's the exact same waiter, just seen from two totally different points of view. And that's the full stack perspective in a nutshell. Okay, so every good manager needs to know their tools, right? From the stoves in the kitchen to the forks in the dining room. It's the same for a full stack developer. They have to be fluent with the tools for both sides of the house.
Let's break down their toolkit. You can think of back-end languages like Python or Java as the fundamental cooking style. Is it French, Italian? What's the approach? Then you have back-end frameworks like Django. Those are the recipe books that provide structure and make things repeatable. And finally, you've got the front-end frameworks like React. That's all about the plating and service, how the final dish looks and is presented to the guest. A full-stack developer knows how all of these pieces fit together to make a great meal. Now, this kind of versatility is useful anywhere for sure. But in a startup, it's not just useful, it's absolutely critical. In that kind of environment, the manager often has to be way more than just a manager. Think about it. In the very early days of a startup, the full-stack developer is pretty much the restaurant owner. They're doing everything themselves. They're in the kitchen cooking, they're out front serving customers, they're managing the books. Then, as the company grows, they can transition into that true manager role. They hire specialists, a chef for this, a waiter for that, but, and this is key, they never lose that ability to jump in and fix a problem anywhere, whether it's an issue with the menu's font or a problem with the walk-in freezer. And that adaptability is really the superpower here. For smaller teams, for companies that need to move fast, you absolutely need people who can wear multiple hats. You need problem solvers who don't have to wait for another department. That is the true value of a full-stack developer. All right, so if you're a recruiter or a hiring manager, this is probably what you're wondering. How on earth do you find one of these people? How do you spot that perfect restaurant manager in a huge stack of resumes? Well, here are 3 questions that will help you cut right through the noise. The first one gets at their technical knowledge. Do they know how the kitchen and dining room connect? The second one asks for a real story. Tell me about a time you basically ran the whole show. And the third question is about their mindset. Do they think about how the teams should work together? The answers you get will tell you pretty quickly if you're talking to a true full-stack thinker. Because remember, the goal here isn't just to hire someone who can write code. You're looking for a problem solver, someone who can connect the dots. You're looking for an efficiency multiplier,
The right full stack hire can totally change the game for your team's speed and creativity.
Yeah, this really sums it up perfectly. They bring flexibility. They're like that multitasking manager who can see a bottleneck forming between the kitchen and the servers before anyone else even notices there's a problem.
So that's the real question you have to ask yourself. Does your team need a specialist, an amazing chef who only does one thing perfectly? Or do you need that versatile manager who can run the whole restaurant? There's no wrong answer. It just depends on what you need. Thanks for joining me.